and relied on by many people for your ability to skewer the Democratic Party establishment and show their hypocrisy and just show the extent of their shortcomings. Why is it so important for you to highlight that?
That because that is again, I say this in comedy clubs in front of regular people, not my own audience, and they get it. I say, everybody's anger is focused on Trump. Trump didn't cause 80% of the workers to live paycheck to paycheck. Trump didn't take us to Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. Trump Trump didn't make people buried under mountains of student debt. You get rid of Trump, we still have this problem, as Chris Hedges says. Trump is what you get it's what gets vomited up from a failed democracy. So my point is, you get rid of Trump, you get rid of Penn, you get rid of the Republicans. You got to have something to replace them with. So when we replaced George W. Bush with Barack Obama, and then he turned out to be Mitt Romney, 8 years later, we got Donald Trump. So if you don't actually do something for the people, if the Democratic Party isn't ready to actually lead and serve the people, we're going to get a worse Trump. And that's a fact. That's not a theory. That's how Trump happened. And they've been predicting this is going to happen. And finally, it happened. This is what happens after 40 years of lesser of two evils and shaming people. All the Democrats have left now is voter shaming. It's amazing. All those celebrities, you see those tweets. Hey, I told a bar back to make sure he votes. It's like, hey, why don't you tell the Democrat running, trying to get that guy's vote, to advocate for something that would make that guy's life better? That's what you should do. So this idea that you hate Trump, that is not a political position. That is an emotional temper tantrum that doesn't get anything done. So I'm trying to remind people that the reason we have Donald Trump is because of the amazing rot and corruption inside the Democratic Party. The politician that we deserve that be president was Bernie Sanders. And we would have had Bernie Sanders president if it wasn't for the unbelievable and complete corruption of the Democratic National Committee, which was 100% corrupted by the Hillary Clinton campaign. When you were giving money to a state party, that money was being funneled to Brooklyn to Hillary Clinton's campaign, which is fraud, which never gets talked about. And that's why we have Donald Trump. So until we fix the rotten corruption inside the Democratic Party, we're never going to get rid of Donald Trump's. We're going to keep getting worse ones. And that's the thing. People have no idea how horrible Barack Obama was. People have no idea that poor people in Milwaukee and Michigan who voted for Barack Obama twice would not go vote for Hillary Clinton because they voted for Barack Obama twice and their lives got worse. That's not my words. That's their words from a New York Times article that went to Milwaukee and interviewed barbers in a barbershop. 4 of them voted for Barack Obama twice. Only 2 of them voted in 2016, and neither of them voted for Hillary.
And in that same interview where she famously called Jill Stein a Russian asset and said the same thing about Tulsi Gabbard, although she tried to deny that, but she clearly did. Hillary Clinton tried to blame, quote, the Russians for her loss in Michigan.
I mean, we're going to have a lot of problems. And the thing we have to do is get enough people to turn out so that they can't steal those votes through suppression in Wisconsin or convince blacks not to vote in Michigan, all the stuff that they did this last time, which was very effective and the Russians played a big role in.
So there you go, Jimmy. It's not the fact that Hillary Clinton had a economic legacy that voters rejected and that Obama did too. It's that the Russians helped play a part in convincing blacks not to vote in Michigan. Like, the self-delusion and also the racist contempt.
Yes,
it's crazy.
That's what that is. Yeah, that's Hillary Clinton saying, "Oh, blacks are so stupid that they can get manipulated by Russia. See how dumb they are? It wasn't my friends in white suburbia. It was dumb black people who got manipulated by the Russians." That's what she's saying, correct?
That's what it seems like to me, and it's amazing how all that gets a pass. I mean, part of the problem was because what she said in that same interview about Tulsi Gabbard and Jill Stein was so nutty that, understandably there was focus on that. But it's crazy that, a establishment figure, a former Secretary of State, former presidential candidate, a possible future presidential candidate, given that she's not ruling it out now, can say something like that, and it's normalized. Like the underlying contempt that elites have for voters, especially people of color, is it's so stark, but yet it's so normalized that it doesn't even get any attention or pushback. And yet it's people. And yet meanwhile, if we talk about bias amongst candidates, there's so much focus on whether or not a Bernie Sanders supporter on Twitter said something biased, and that's then deemed to be emblematic of the entire movement. Well, what about what Hillary Clinton says out in the open, and no one even says anything?
Yeah, well, you sound like me. You sound like you're. That's the kind of angst I usually carry around all day. It's like no one's even saying anything, and the problem with the Bernie Sanders the campaign is that they actually validate stupid criticisms like, "Hey, there's a rando on Twitter said something mean to your opponent. You have to apologize," and then they do. So that's kind of Bernie Sanders playing into that way too much. His willingness to placate the establishment or in the PC crowd and people who are dishonest actors doesn't make any sense to me. Again, Bernie Sanders is popular because of Bernie Sanders. His strategists are not the brightest guys in the world, and they keep having. What kind of a strategist lets a guy scream for an hour after his microphone goes out the night before a televised debate? That guy should be fired. No one got fired. Again, this is so I get your frustration about Hillary Clinton being able to say this, how it's normalized, but I think that Hillary Clinton overreached, as Tom Brokaw would say, so fantastically. It sounded like a sketch from Saturday Night Live or something, where everybody was right. Yeah, and Tulsi's a Russian asset, and of course Jill Stein, she's a Russian too. Everybody's a Russian. It was fun. Regular people who are regular establishment mouthpieces like Aaron Burnett were laughing at that clip, right? So when you've lost Aaron Burnett, I think with your Russian red baiting, I think you've lost the center at the very least. So I think that's good. Actually, it helped Tulsi. She's polling at 6% now in New Hampshire, way above top tier candidate Kamala Harris. So so now, like when Hillary said that, oh, you're a Russian, it was almost like a punchline. So now people are starting to use that. I see comedians starting to use that as a punchline. And so that when that becomes a punchline to everybody, that will be when the Russiagate finally is put to rest, when it becomes just a term of derision to mock somebody as a tinfoil hat knucklehead, which is what they are.
Finally, Jimmy, one thing that I also think has set your program apart is that unlike other major progressive platforms, you're not just trying to appeal to a sort of coastal urban audience, liberal audience. You don't have contempt for people who may not have voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and you don't have contempt for even some people who voted for Donald Trump. And I know that there are many Trump voters out there who voted for Trump probably based on racism and based on misogyny. But I also know that there are others who voted for Trump as an act of desperation, as an act of protest against the system. And I'm wondering, as you've traveled around the country and you've met with your audience and heard from people, whether that's your sense as well.
That is exactly the sense I get, and you're right. I travel all around the country, and I meet people after my shows. And I was just in Buffalo, New York. So we had people from all over New York. We had people from Canada, from Toronto come, and we're going to Philly next week. We'll be there for 2 or 3 nights. So we get out there. We go all over, and that's exactly this sentiment in the country. I remember I talked to a guy, I think his name was Nick Smith, who is he's a cook at a Waffle House in Virginia. And he said, we all knew that Donald Trump was a loudmouth Yankee who should have had his ass kicked in a long time ago. And he said, but when Hillary Clinton comes here and says, we're going to get rid of coal, and he comes and says, I'm going to bring your jobs back, we have no choice. We're desperate. We don't have a life. He said, I work for minimum wage at the Waffle House. There are no jobs here, and we're desperate. So at least he was offering something. That's exactly right what we said. Hillary Clinton wouldn't even give us lip service. Hey, promise us Medicare for all and then get elected and say I couldn't get it done. But she was gleeful about that. It wouldn't have. And it'll never come to pass. Like the only time she got excited is when she was telling you the stuff you couldn't have. So that's why, no, when you meet a guy like Nick Smith, who's a Waffle House cook who tells you that story, how could you have contempt for that guy? That's a Trump voter. I have plenty of Trump voters who come to my show who tell me, hey, I was a Trump voter and you changed me, right? Or you opened my eyes. They're not a Democrat, but they understand now that it's a one-party system and that it's really us against the donor class, and we don't live in a democracy anymore, and we haven't for quite a while.
You know, Jimmy, for a split second there, I could have mistaken you for a Democratic politician on the presidential debate stage when you said, you know, I talked to Nick Smith, an employee at a Waffle House. I had a flash there of Jimmy on the campaign stage delivering his stump speech.
That did sound like that, didn't it? You know, when I travel around this country and I meet people like Nick Smith, a Waffle House cook, and he tells me that he voted for Trump, that's exactly right. You know, my mother-in-law voted for Trump. And she's a wonderful person, and it had a lot to do with the long-held hatred of the Clintons, rightfully so, and their corruption. And, of course, she's religious, so abortion played into that, too. So, I mean, I have Trump voters in my family. I'm not going to hate my family, right? I'm going to try to understand them. And so instead of running around calling them deplorables, why don't you run around calling them people desperate enough to take a chance on a game show host? That's what they really are.
All right, we're going to wrap it there. So, Jimmy, you are in Philadelphia next week. You're also going to Hawaii at the end of the year, right?
We'll be in Hawaii December 27th. We'll be in Portland, Oregon, January 11th, 12th, Tempe in February, Sacramento, San Jose in February. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets. And we'll see you in Miami also next year. So go to my website and see if we're coming to your town. We probably are.
Jimmy Dore, the show is, of course, the Jimmy Dore Show, which you can find online. Jimmy, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for helping me push back.
That's going to be my new tag at the beginning of all my intros. Thank you, Jimmy.